So everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited for today's session. I think typically we do a lot of sessions, and in general, there's a lot of educational material out there and content out there for return to sport, various sports, various degrees of injury. I think there's very little done in general on how to differentiate between sports, how you look at potentially an offensive lineman and a running back, and in this case, a big man or a center forward kind of type, and a shooting guard. So I think in general, this is a really important thing to cover because these are such different body types. The same way you wouldn't rehab, two different sort of non-athletes that have very different body types the same way and the demands they have on their lives. So I'm very excited to have Leon Knight sort of here with us. So we'll have an overview of the physical demands of the positions, a description of each body type, and really the assessments used, and more importantly, based on their demands, the return to sport testing that needs to take place. So this is our third one with Dr. Knight here. And so just if you haven't been here, he's the owner of Good Performance Doc Rehab and Sports, the Physical Therapy Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's an orthopedic and sports physical therapist who works with high school, collegiate, and professional athletes, specializing in sports-specific rehab and performance training. He describes his approach as really practical, and we've had actually webinars on that, which I think is really important, and performance-based. Dr. Leon earned his doctorate degree from New York Medical College and his Bachelor of Science from Elon University. So without further ado, go ahead.
Hey, Alex, thank you, man. The third time doing it, and look forward to this one. I know when we were planning this and trying to figure out what topic, when we came across this subject, I thought it was a good idea, right? And as you mentioned beforehand, like when people talk about return to sport, they just think, how can I get the person in front of me back to playing in a safe manner? And for the most part, the skills level in which they were playing prior to, right? But they never really consider, or it's never mentioned, that he's a guard or this position is they play this position, so therefore we want them to have a certain we want them to have certain tests that they pass just for this particular position that make sure that they're not generally returning to sport, but they actually are having these specific have the ability to perform these specific demands over and over. So I think, like, when we came up with the idea, it was a great idea. And as he mentioned, for this particular webinar, we are comparing two different positions in regards to basketball positions. So let's keep it simple. Big men. So you have your forwards, power forwards, and sometimes small forwards. And then you have your point guards and your shooting guards. And small forwards can either be considered a big man or a guard or a wing player. That's important for you to figure out when you have that particular person in front of you in regards to if they play more on the perimeter or they play more inside. So when we go through the PowerPoint, feel free to ask questions along the way. I'm excited for you guys I'm excited to share this information with you because I've worked with a good number of athletes, I would say over the past 7 years, and I'm still learning what's the best way to treat, assess, and make sure they return in a manner that they're going to be best prepared for their particular position in sport. Give you an example. I always see mainly the pros. They're going to be seen right after their season. It's usually around June, and they're there for the off season till August or September. And oftentimes they come back injured and they never quite got rehab the way they needed to during the season. So I call it the 3 R's. So I'm looking to rehab them, so because they have pain and limitations. I'm looking to restore them. So whatever impairments that we worked on locally, we try to restore it into some form of a, a movement pattern, right? Like squat, lunge, like put it all together in a kinetic type of chain, load it, right? Build up their tolerance. And then I call the readiness phase, which is the return to sport, their ability to have a higher capacity, right? So now they can do it over and over, multiple days a week. They can train, they can play a full game. And then what you guys haven't seen, or when I post these players in terms of their return to sports stuff, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is really specific to the demand of the position. So excited to share this with you, and we can get started.
Leon, one other thing before we sort of get moving too far forward. Um, I'm just going to just level set for everyone out there. Obviously, when you say big man versus not big man position, we're not talking about men and male sports specifically. These are positions in basketball that have just
Yes. Yeah.
typically been called that. But of course, this is applying to the women's game. Same positions, maybe different demands, but the differentiation between the various positions obviously applies here. So I just wanted to sort of clear that up in case anyone has any sort of reservations. The women's game, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, is maybe different in terms of the way it's played, but the position, the variability in those positions certainly can apply here as well. Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay, but I just want to make sure that's what you meant as well. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. So yeah, it's just pos- center, forward, power forward, point guard, shooting guard. Yes, and it goes across the board,
Mhm.
male, men's game and women's game.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we share the slides. Can everyone see that? Or Leah, can you see the slides there?
Yeah, I can see them.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, let's rock and roll.
All right, let's go. All right, so let's first start with body
Yeah.
types, and we chose the NBA, but just think of it as basketball, right? Don't worry about if it's professional, collegiate, high school. A lot of the stuff that we discuss is going to be specific to any of those levels of play. So let's go to body types. All right, so we have, and to keep it very simple, just think of like centers are going to be the ones that play a little bit more in the paint, your rebounders playing with their back against the basket. Nowadays, they're facing up a little bit more, but ultimately, they're going to be the tallest players and the biggest players on the court, right? For the most part. So I just wanted to have some numbers for you guys. That's why I chose like NBA. But you'll see like in terms of height, 6'9" to 7 foot, average height we're talking about, and the average weight is about 250. Okay, and then some characteristics of the way they play and what are the demands. They're going to play. They play physical. They're going to be tall. They're going to be big, very big guys, or players, I should say. And in their roles, they're going to rebound. They're looking to score in the paint, setting picks, screens for the perimeter players to get open. So those are usually their roles and tasks. Compared to your perimeter players, which are your guards, they're going to be, you can see height wise, they're going to be shorter, 6 foot to 6'3". Average weight is about 197. And then they're just they require speed, agility, change of direction, ball skills. A lot of that's what their demands are for their particular their position. And then their roles are going to be they're going to start the offense. They run the offense, they distribute the ball, they penetrate, so they're going to drive to the basket, they shoot. They're looking to set up other players through assists, and then also they're making sure they're playing perimeter defense. Not so much in the paint. All right. Key definitions when it comes to position demands. I really focused on, at least in this first half of this PowerPoint slide, isometric, right? And so when we talk about isometric type of strength training or contractions, you're looking at where the muscle, and you guys are familiar, but the muscle's like this, right? When you contract that muscle, there's no change in the length of the muscle. So usually there's no change, but there is a contraction compared to it being contracted normally, which we do, lengthening and shortening, which is concentric for shortening and eccentric for lengthening. Now, taking the isometrics a step further, we have two subcategories, which is the first one is yielding isometrics. So this is when you're holding a position and resisting the urge to move, right? And so an example would be if I was to perform a split squat, right? So I get into a split squat position and I say hold for 15 seconds, that means you're trying to hold that position, as still as a rock without moving. Okay. The second definition or second sub definition would be overcoming isometrics. So the way this would look is if I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but if you have a squat rack, right, and you decide to put the safety bar on both sides up a little higher, and you have the bar on your back, like a back squat, and you were to try to force yourself into that safety rack and hold that position, meaning you're trying to move an immovable object, that is overcoming isometrics. And the reason why I want to go over these definitions because they are used throughout the game, and certain positions use them more. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'll kind of give you an example.
I think one second. I think it's interesting because the previous poll, we asked, what's an example of a center versus a guard, right? And we are almost completely split amongst the three choices, except for LeBron and D Wade, because no one knows what LeBron's position actually is.
Okay.
And so, I mean, in your opinion, right, you got Michael and Scotty, Shaq and Kobe, and Jokic and Jamal Murray. What do you think is the best example of pure center, pure point, or pure big man, pure point? And again, obviously not like in the NBA, things are so much more blurred
That's
than they
right.
are below,
People are versatile,
especially
right?
now. But we've got four people for Shaq and Kobe and Jokic and Murray. Now one person sort of putting
I
themselves
have
out there.
Jokic and Murray, right?
Jokic and
If you
Murray.
were to really, if you were to truly say who's bringing up the ball majority of the times, right? That's Jamal Murray over Kobe Bryant. Usually, if you guys remember the Laker teams, it was Derek Fisher, you had Ron Harper, you had like in terms of their championship level teams. Kobe Bryant he brought up the ball. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't his main
Role.
task, which was to bring up the ball. Yeah.
All right, so I thought it was interesting because obviously the game's evolving, but certainly
It is.
qualifying or classifying the athlete into a category that makes a little bit more sense objectively. Again, that's what we're trying to really do here: is not train them in basketball, but understand their basketball needs to be able to get them to the level where they can train for those needs.
And that's why I think it's important to just almost categorize them as guards and wing or paint players almost, because as you can see, the roles are interchangeable in the game now, right? You can have a shooting guard bring up the ball almost 50-50 to the point guard. And so if you just put like a guard as the category, then you still would be right in terms of if you put certain assessments for that. And what you'll see too, as I'm glad you brought this up, Alex, as the game evolves or continues to evolve, you'll see big men doing things that guards are doing, like being able to handle the ball. They're playing more face to the basket, facing up, going towards the basket, playing on the perimeter. So they're going to need a lot of the skills as well as assessment tools that I'm going to put in for the guards, right? So it's really know your patient or client that's in front of you. And that's the critical thinking piece where you say, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of both, right? Ideally, you always want to have some comprehensive plan. So we're good on that, Alex? All right. All right, let's talk about position demands. All right. We talked about it. I shared a little bit on the two slides previously, but really, I won't read everything. It's just a matter of like, I want to dive into the isometric piece, right? And so if you look at the centers are trying to overcome a force while getting to a spot through contact, right? And so if you think about it, going back to the definition, I'm and again with these definitions, they're not going to be exactly represented through the example, but I just want you to think in a way that is critical so that you can make these choices whenever you do treatment, assessing, and then also your programming, right? And so when I talk about you're trying to move an immovable object, so overcoming isometrics, when you're trying to gain position in the paint to rebound, to seal off a defender, to post up. The defender is trying not to move. He's not allowing you to go to the basket. He's not allowing you to get to the rebound. So I'm using overcoming isometrics as an example or a possible um, or possibly using that as an exercise in someone's program that is a big man, more so than I probably would use it for a guard, right? And because the idea is they're trying to fight, they're fighting for position, and position is very important for their particular uh, for their role, right? So they always are trying to fight for position. So I think that's important for you to think about. And then now guards can do they can have a sort they are going against external forces, right? In which they're trying to when they're driving to the basket, they're being defended, and the defender is trying to take them off of the path that they're trying to go when it comes towards penetrating to the basket. That's not quite overcoming isometrics, but you can see where like having the ability to maintain a position or a pathway against resistance is still important for a guard, right? And so the way you would program that may be slightly different from the centers, but still, if you notice, there's some overlap in regards to what these positions demand, but differently. It will look different in their program. The second piece is the 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 centers are a little bit more robotic, right? And so they do perform they perform movements on all three planes, but they're not changing positions, changing direction as fluidly as your guards, right? And so you look at guards, point guards, and regular guards. They rely on speed, agility, change of direction, reactive movements. They're jumping off 2 feet and 1 foot, right? And landing that way. Whereas your big men are, for the most part, they're going to be in a squat position, and they're jumping from a quarter squat up and down, usually bilaterally. Now, they do layups, single leg, right? Hops, jumps. But for the most part, if you watch a big man, or I should say a center or forwards, most of their jumps are bilateral, right? Compared to guards, where you see now the way the game is evolving, they have so many different finishes where they're going off on the wrong foot normally for a layup. They are doing floaters, right? So there's one foot float, one legged floaters. So they have to have the variety in their game to hop, land, jump off of both feet as well as 1 foot. Uh, when it comes to angles, again, I think you're going to find that guards have to deal with a lot more angles when they're defending and nowadays when they're playing. So you see a lot of step backs, Euro steps, right? Those are side steps. You're starting to see so much movement variety or variability that I think is very important that when you're programming for these guards or assessing or trying to come up return to sport testing, it's important that you're looking at a lot more movement variability in these different planes of motion, different planes. Now, as far as mobility goes, I think for the most part they both need the same. I would put a heavy emphasis on ankle mobility, hip mobility for guards, just because they are they're going to be more of a split stance position, right, compared to your centers and the centers and forwards, who are going to be a little bit more bilateral in their frontal plane. And so I just believe in making sure that they have the ability to get in that dorsiflexion really well. When it comes to playing defense on the perimeter, I'm talking about our guards here. They have to have the ability to open up their hips, right? Adductor mobility. Of course, they have to have the ability to get down low into squat positions, right? Deep hip flexion. So I'm really looking at those things compared to my centers and forwards. I want them to have the shoulder flexibility, right? They're going up for rebounds, contesting shots. I want them to get full 180. So those are things that I'm looking for. Um, as far as wrist and shoulder, that just goes with shooting, right? You got to be able to load that wrist completely in order to get that arc on your shot. If they come in and you can't get it this far, then you know you have some work to do. They're going to be limited. They're not going to be like Steph Curry and be able to that wrist and get the range of motion that they would need if they were guards in the NBA, so to speak. And then so as far as core stability goes, for my centers, I like static. Like I go heavy on static. Why? Let me go back and show you. I want them to have the ability to do so a lot of the programming that I would do for static would be your yielding isometrics. I want them to be able to hold a position and not move against the external force, right? And so my static, I want them to be strong in position compared to my guards. I want their core stability to be reactive, dynamic, right? They're changing positions, angles. I want them to be able to have stability in the lateral chain, the spiral chain, right? Anterior chain. Like I want them to have all those different things. And I think that's very important. So you're looking at um, chop and lift, chops, lifts, diagonal movements, a lot of different variation when it comes to upper extremity and lower extremity.
Leon, I'm glad you brought up some of the distal extremity, wrist and ankle sort of mobility. When somebody comes in, whether it's a back or a hip, even a knee, shoulder, something a little bit more typical that they would see a PT for, let's exclude ankle for a second. And
Okay.
you notice that, let's say it's a lower extremity injury and you do notice that there's a lack of ankle control and mobility. If you do have, let's say, two scenarios, and they may be different, they may be not. If somebody is in season and you're fighting back after a mild MCL, a hip flexor strain, something like that, where they're going to get back in season, how much attention are you paying to the distal extremity, not because it necessarily relates to the injury itself, but because of the demands it's going to take when they come back to sport?
Yeah, that's a great question. I look at it as a whole, right? I look at it as a whole unit. So I always, when it comes to treatment or getting someone back, when they first come in, I always look at I play it as ratios, right? And so in this example, you said they had a strain, right? A little higher up compared to the ankle, right? Was it adductor strain or I can't remember.
Yeah, let's say it's an adductor strain and you
Adductor.
notice that they have poor ankle mobility and strength.
Yeah, so adductor strain. Excuse me. I'm assuming they have pain, right? And so I have to address the pain, but on top of that, I know that they have limited ankle mobility and strength. Now, the strength, are you talking about just lower half in general?
No, specifically. I mean, and let's just say that it isn't necessarily isometric strength, and you've tested it, but they've got a lack of control at that ankle, right? They're stiff, and they have a lack of sort of control, whether it's of the midfoot or of the arch, or their ability to sort of control just kind of stability, kind of in that lower leg in general. Are
Okay.
you? I guess my question is more: are you paying attention to that in your rehab? Or are you focusing more, are you spending time, in terms of prioritization, are you spending time on that, and how much of it are you spending time on if they are, let's say, more of a guard versus a center, like if their demands on the position demand
Mm.
more lateral cutting and shifting, because of the demands of the position as they go back, does that play into your decision making process on how much time to spend on it?
So it's a loaded question, right? But yeah, so if it's a guard, right? Let's say it's a guard come in with an adductor strain and limited ankle mobility as well as decreased ankle strength. I'm gonna go a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2-to-1 ratio meaning addressing the adductor strain. That means pain, soft tissue extensibility, and strength, right? So for every exercise that I may do with the ankle, I have to do 2 for the adductor, right? Because it's still my priority.
Mhm.
But if it is, let's say for instance, it is a center, then that ratio will be a little bit greater, right? Meaning like I won't spend it won't be so close in exercises from one to the other, right? Because they don't need as much, right, of the strength and more so the variability, the ankle mobility as a guard. So yes, my priority would be the adductor strain, and I'm gonna immediately still because I'm still gonna work on. I'm immediately gonna incorporate the ankle strength and the mobility. with a guard. Down the line, so 3-to-1 ratio would mean for a center, the first couple of weeks, I may not even consider the ankle, right? I want them to get their brute strength back, right? I want them strong. I want them to be strong in a position. I want them to be able to maintain position. So that 3-to-1 ratio, it may be mainly adductor strength, isometric strength, and then focus on loading that adductor in its entire length, so eccentric strength, right? And so those exercises will take precedence over the ankle. But down the road, as it's getting closer to full recovery, then I may add the ankle stuff. But it's not as
And
much.
you'd say, and similar probably in your approach to sort of wrist mobility and wrist, kind of lower arm or distal arm strength for a shoulder injury in both types.
That's right. Look,
Say that.
if my center and forward they get 5 shots a game, then I'm not worried about their wrist
Right.
mobility as much as I am the guard that's taking 15, 16 shots a game. So the
Yeah, and I
guard,
think again, I think that's something to really consider because you're really not just it's not just return to sport. It's the beginning of your rehab process and planning it out. Um, as you begin through it, differentiating between the two types of bodies out, the two types of athletes, as you sort of go through it, as opposed to just thinking about, okay, what's their clearance and how do we clear them for sport?
that's right. That's right. Um, and then of course at the end you see, I like my athletes to be strong. They don't like to lift weights, Alex, but I like them to be strong. I do. And I think that leads me to our next slide, which is, oh, sorry, before I even get into strength stuff, this is, I don't know how many people here. It would be cool to actually ask that question to see how many people here, I guess in the chat, can say they have uh, got a chance to either watch or attend the first webinar that I did when it came to like ACL return to sport, because some of these things will look similar, which is almost my preloaded exam. I just want to see how you move, what type of strength you have, what type of balance you have, some motor control type of test. So if you see here, this, you may be looking at it like, man, he's doing the same thing for both of them. You're right. You're right. I am because I think you should have some baseline that you want most people, regardless of size, to be able to complete. Like you just have to be able to do these things before I can really do these things well, and then we can move on to me feeling comfortable loading you, like truly loading you the way I want you to load, and getting the maximum benefit out of these exercises that are more in the advanced stage. But as you can see, I'll go through the list real quick. It's just, you guys are probably familiar with a lot of these things, which is the Y balance, upper extremity Y balance. Um, we have the athletic shoulder test with force plates. You have the push-up endurance test, the pull-up test. You have the closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test. You have the Y balance test for lower extremity, right? That's three different ways we do it. And then some of this stuff is where I like use on a consistent basis, which is a lateral step down test, a front step down test, 25 single leg squat to box, 25 single leg bridges on a bench. And then I love to see calf strength. So I'm looking at least 30 single leg calf raises. And then when we pull out the measures for those pesky muscles that get tweaked all the time, which is your hamstrings, your quads, and your adductors in regards to this sport, right? People they pull a hamstring, oftentimes the groin, adductor. So I just want to see from right to left, what are we actually measuring in terms of output, in terms of meaning peak force, average force, how quick do they fatigue? So that's our KINVENT isometric testing that we do with the K push or K pull, um, whichever one I decide at that time.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that to sort of note on this is that most of all of these tests have an objective component, regardless of the use of dynamometry, force plates, goniometry, measure of length and Y balance. The point is that you are objectifying your measurements so that you can compare them later, and that's the overarching goal of where physical therapy is going, and I believe sort of needs to go. to have any kind of seat at the table with conversations with, you know, physicians or even ourselves amongst ourselves, right? I think having having the same approach to evaluating the baseline of athletes, almost regardless, as you said, regardless of sport, and certainly regardless of position within a sport, allows us to have that conversation across sports of, okay, what is it? What does a quad to hamstring ratio look like in an athlete at X level, at X sport, at X gender? And then you go from there to parse it out. But if we don't have that data to begin with, we can't have the conversation. So the more standardized we can do it, and the more broad scale we can do it at, I think that it brings us closer and closer to have actual data to talk about, rather than argue about how we rehab as opposed to why we're rehabbing what we're rehabbing.
That's right. And then also you get a chance that if they fail in any capacity, according to whatever your standards are, you get a chance to see how well your programming is, right? Are they getting better, right? How effective your programming is. So assess, treat, or plan, and then reassess is very important, and do it very frequently. Your reassessment should be very frequent, and you should see improvements within the exercise, drill, modification that you have programmed that addresses whatever specific test that they failed, right? It has to be very specific, so therefore you get the carryover when you do retest it. All right, more key terms. When we get to return to sport, let's just say they passed everything, right? The preloaded assessment. Then I start to hone in on their sport, their demand of their position a little bit more. So I say, all right, absolute strength. That's when you go in and you decide, what is my 1 rep max? It's the maximum amount of weight that an individual can lift for 1 rep, right? That's, just look at it as raw strength, brute strength. How much weight can you move? That's what we look at. Just make it simple. Now, relative strength is harder to quantify, right? Because you have to take in consideration the person's body size and then compare it to how much they're lifting, right? There are measures for it. I don't have the equation, but like, it's kind of complicated. But ultimately, you get a chance to say, you want to see how well can they move um, according to their body size, weight. You know what I mean? And so there's, like, again, there's a calculation, but ultimately, I look at the relative strength as, we're looking at strength, motor control, balance, and mobility. That's how I use it, right? And so you'll see some of these things that can be like, one example was like the single leg squat test that I just had on the preloaded test assessment. It's just getting a chance to see how well they move dynamically for their size and weight. Anything else?
No, I think that's all good. I think relative strength, absolute strength, I would say overall there's absolute objective measures and relative objective measures, right? Things that are sort of harder to quantify, but still find some sort of numerical way to quantify, even for the one session, versus an absolute number of sort of strength. There's an interesting poll, and I want to see what you think.
What do we have?
Which of the following applies more to centers than point guards? Farmers walk, single leg hop, pro agility, or conditioning test?
I'm so happy that they chose farmer walk. That's exactly what I want them to
So the
get out of it.
majority of folks did
Yeah.
choose farmers walk, right? So some of that stability, some of that sort of gross strength to be
Right.
able to sort of be the tree in the middle that doesn't let things in.
I like that. Be the tree in the middle. And that's exactly what we want them to be. All right. Next one is, so you guys, this return to sport criteria, I think it's fun, right? This is not the only way to do it, but this is a way to kind of think about it, right? Again, I want you guys to come out of this thinking, oh, if I have two different players, how do I want to approach it? What are the demands? Just get you guys thinking, right? And so following with that theme, look at the centers, what I'm asking them to be able to do before they return to sport. And these are just normal, these are objective measures. I want them to have 50% of their body weight in each hand. And there's the distance. Oh, I didn't put the distance, but it's either they have to do it for, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. They have to do it for 90 seconds or for 200 and I believe it's 70 feet. Sorry, I wish I had this, guys. I think it's 270 feet, whichever one comes last. So they can't walk it very fast, right? Or they can't like go very slow and not have 270 feet. I have it in my protocol that I have in the office. For some reason, I forgot the number, but that's what I'm looking for there. So we're looking at strength, isometric strength, grip strength, shoulder strength, dynamic stability, and endurance. Right, all of those are very important. The back squat. Some people like, man, you shouldn't have these guys back squat, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm just going with an objective number, right, of lower body strength, and I want them to be able to do 2 times their body weight. Deadlift, we're looking at with the trap bar because from just a regular bar gets tricky, and most pro athletes prefer the trap bar, so 2.5 times their body weight. Bench press, 1.75 times their body weight. And then the conditioning tests, these conditioning tests were specifically given to me by one of my NBA guys, where he said, you got it, it's called 33s. So down and back, you got to be able to do 6 laps with a 30-second rest in between only. So if you miss one, meaning not get 33 seconds on one of the laps, you failed the test. So I just want to make sure I make sense of this. You're required to get down and back in 33 seconds. You do that one time, you get 30-second rest. You go back again. You do that, you do it within the time, that's 2 until you get to 6. If you miss, if you do it in 34 seconds on your 5th lap, 5th time, then that's a fail, right? And so that's a conditioning test. We'll go back to, if we go to the point guards, right, and looking at some of the criteria, you're going to see I'm looking at the single hop test. I want LSI limb symmetry index to be, I like it high, but not, really not. So yeah, 95, 98%. I really like it to be high. Or or there are norms out there. Sometimes it's hard to find the norms. I know there's norms for like D1 athletes, high school athletes. I just haven't found the norms for professional athletes. But if there are norms, then I'm using those norms compared to if they are 95% from left to right. Okay, because give me an example. Let's just say someone is able, a pro athlete jumps. Let me make this up. 70 centimeters. Right? If they 70 centimeters, but the norm is 100 centimeters, then they're too far. It's too much of a gap, and I don't feel comfortable with that. I'd rather them be in the norm category compared to 5% difference from left to right. Triple hop, same thing. And then you have your pro agility test, which is it's like a shuttle run. I'm looking, and it's a change of direction, being able to stop on a dime, change direction in a very short amount of space. That'll give me the opportunity to see their ankle mobility, how deep they can get, right? Deceleration, acceleration. Those are very important. Stopping on a dime, change of direction, as we mentioned when it comes to guards demand, the position demand. And then I do want them to have a certain level of strength, but they don't have to be brute guys, right? They don't have to be moving the same type of weight that the centers are going to be requested or asked to do. So these assessments are the upper extremity and lower extremity assessments. They consist of a goblet squat, a forward lunge, dumbbell RDLs, and those are my main ones. Those are my main ones that I look at. And the numbers that I get are based or off of the website strengthlevel.com. And I use the elite, advanced to elite level or category that they have because these guys are at least in this particular example, they're pros, right? And so I want them to be strong uh, beyond your general population. Okay. And then so conditioning wise, they have two tests, right? So think of the first test, think of the test that I did for the center. Just imagine. And it was interesting talking to one of my one of the NBA guy that I mentioned earlier about this test. If you go back, so you got to think about it. Let's at the most, they're gonna go back. They're gonna go full court down and back 2 to 3 times without interruption, right? So this conditioning test for 6 laps, the 33 seconds, it's pretty on par for big men, right? You're not going to ask them to have the ability to keep going and going and going and going and going, right? They're not going to be leading the fast break. Oftentimes they're trailing, right? They're not going to finish the fast break oftentimes. So they don't need to be out in front, get back, out in front again. Like they're not going to be required to really go consistently back and forth without stopping. Whereas now you have our guards and he told me this condition test is for the guards, which is more so a 3 minute run line touches 30 to 35 is considered passing. So down, back for 3 minutes. And that makes more sense, right? Because they play more minutes. They're going to be required to play more minutes throughout the game. They have more to do, run the offense, play perimeter defense. Like they're moving much more off the screens, um, just they're expending way more energy than the big men, which are going to be camped out in the paint, right? So their motion throughout the game or through these sets are going to be less. And so the 30 to 35 laps or time line touches, I should say, it makes more sense. And then I still put in the 6 laps for 33 seconds because I do want to see them in short bursts. Can they get up and down the court the way they should be able to if they're pushing the ball or they're playing in an up tempo offense? So as you can see, like I'm a little bit more what I'm requiring differently from each position based on the demands.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's super interesting. Good to obviously touch on. There's one question in the chat, as you mentioned, sort of back squat would be probably the hottest button. But like, do you have a depth? Is it parallel? Is it 3/4? Is it if they're doing most things out of a quarter squat, is that all you're squatting them to, or you have them back squat to parallel?
That's a great question. I usually have them go to parallel or to a box, right? It just depends if I have access to it. But in the past, I've had them go to a box. They're more comfortable going to a box. Um, and when it comes to a box, they're so tall that a 20-inch depth is too deep. So that 24 is usually the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. And then one other question that I have, I think this is not a specific injury talk, but this is more of a return to sport by position talk. But depending on injury, or maybe not depending on injury, are you ever considering kind of readiness to return, mental readiness to return, right? So either the RSI, ACL RSI hip, are you looking at any kind of like fear avoidance, anything like that in your progression? Or does it really depend more on injury if they're coming off of a long-term ACL progression versus a sprained ankle, you're not necessarily looking at it? What are your thoughts on that?
Let me make sure I understand. You asked me basically if it was an ankle injury, do I consider those type of?
Well, I think in general, do you consider the mental aspect of the return? And if you do, does the injury matter more than the sport? Or is it irregardless of injury, I don't consider it, or regardless of injury, I'm just having a conversation, or is there an objective measure you're looking at?
I don't usually use an objective measure. I can say though, a clinician in the past that I worked with brought that up, and I thought it was very interesting. And I used it with one of my patients, and it was telling in regards to mentally where they were compared to where I felt they were physically. So I think it's a good. It's good in order to. It's great to incorporate I think what happened for me when it came to creating this particular presentation was based on experience. A lot of my guys, Alex, are pro guys. And so their mental aspect, usually I don't have to worry about because that's how they feed their family. Right. And so I don't have to really consider the fact that mentally they don't want to go back. It's
So it
usually
sounds
the
like you,
opposite.
so you haven't treated Ben Simmons, it sounds like,
No, I have
perhaps.
not. Not at this point. No, you may be coming your way, but no. So I haven't ran into that.
Right. No,
But
I'm
I
just
do
kidding,
think
obviously,
if
but
you run
yeah.
into like if you have like so for general population, I think it's very helpful, especially your high school and collegiate,
Mhm.
because they are more likely if this is a major injury, like you mentioned, an ACL recovery, um, they maybe have the hesitation of never feeling quite ready or
Right.
comparing themselves to what they were prior to their surgery. So great question. I would consider it, I think, in certain instances. I just, for the most part, when it comes to these guys that I see, they don't they don't have that component. So to measure that, I don't know if I'm getting much out of it.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah. So I think in general, the overall consideration for me is, we want to make sure that we have, really good comparative data, both by position, right, within the sport, and then in general, sport to sport, athlete to athlete, that you're able to. And I think that's the whole point of this is we want to have objective assessment of athletes, as patients, as whomever, so that you can have the conversation with both yourself and the patient and the parent and whoever's involved, or the coaches, about how they stack up, period, objectively from a clinical standpoint. And then drilling deeper, can that patient return to their actual demands? And having the various conditioning tests, having the various types of objective measures prior, I think really does help that quite a bit. So I think that's very much important to assess for sure. Um, Anyone sort of have any questions? Certainly now would be the time to sort of ask them in the chat. I think whether it's basketball or if anybody else has anything specific, with Leon talking about it now. But otherwise, I think, great discussion in general for sure. And just to touch on sort of the mental readiness, not that you asked me, but I'll answer anyway.
Yeah,
I
please.
think I think in general, um, as you said, the more someone is quote unquote a professional and has done it and sort of separated out their emotional component over the course of their career, not because emotions aren't playing a part in it, um, but because they've been forced to sort of play regardless of the emotional sort of attachment to it, they're much more able to separate what they're doing on the court, in the gym, and so on, beyond what they are, sort of how they're feeling that day. That said, I think it is important personally, because it's not something that I was ever formally trained to do, but I think more and more now we have to take into account um, whether or not that person feels mentally ready, right? We talk about, in my practice, we talk about what's called a SANE score of 0 to 100. Where do you think, what percentage are you right now of 100% on the field? Not ready to return, but 100% of your best self of how you feel. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 100, because when you are returning to sport and you're going back to that process, you're not 100%. And you don't have to be. That's why you haven't played yet. But I think getting them to even at the very least just take a little bit of a self poll on where they are is very much important to do, even if it's informal like that. And SANE score, by the way, is a validated measure that you can use, and it's an easy thing versus giving them specifically an RSI, ACL, or something.
Alex, quick question. With you using those measures, the mental, component, have you found that it speeds up your decision to return, help them return, or delay? Like, does it really
Uh,
give you? Does it change
it,
much of your
it
plan?
changes. Yeah, it doesn't speed up or delay it. It changes my ability to get on the same level as that athlete and get them on the same level as their rehab.
Mm,
So if halfway through and they're, let's just say, let's just take an easy one, right? So I'm looking at someone with a lateral ankle sprain, and they've been sort of on active rest slash mobilization for 10 days. They're coming out of it, and they're starting to, regardless of their level of ability, of play, they're starting to do a little bit of motion, a little bit of movement, but everything is static, right? Even if we're lunging laterally, it's all static. Split squat, everything else. And I'm just putting a ball in their hand just to have them dribble for weight shifting for the basketball player, or even not, just to have them weight shift. And I asked them how they feel about return. They say they're 50%. Well, how I think they are and how they think they are very different. And now we have to have a conversation. And I really asked them, so you think you're 50% of your best athletic self, right? So describe to me what 100% sort of feels like. So it lets me walk them towards what, kind of, and maybe I don't understand what they need to do, right? Look, they might be the eighth person on the bench, and they say, look, I'm 100% of myself because I really play about 10 minutes a season, in a basketball arena. So, but to me, I think it's important for them to give themselves an objective measure, to be able to compare how I think about it. And the same goes the other way. If I look at someone and everything checks out on my end, and they say they're 50%, well, maybe there is a little bit of a confidence component that I haven't looked into and haven't exposed them enough to either a fatigue state training, or haven't exposed them enough to a sort of controlled chaos or uncontrolled chaos training, where I could start to push them a little harder, because I think they're physically ready for them to get psychologically more capable and more comfortable.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's informational, but it's certainly not a huge part of it.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's important that I mention that I do ask them, and I do try to figure out where they are. It's funny. I got one of my guys on here actually, that I work with, professional guys, and he's
Let's find out if he really
asked me a
means it.
question. But we're in the thick of things, trying to get him back to return to sport, and we have conversation before every session to figure out where he's at. And I think too, what may be also that you don't that you have to understand with some of the professional athletes, they know their bodies really well. Like they're oftentimes are very in tune, and so the line of communication is much more advanced than you would deal with like a high school athlete, or sometimes even like a freshman in college, right? As they get older and the more they've experienced, and the more they learn their bodies, the questions that you can ask and the feedback they give you really helps tell you what their mental state is. It's just not objective. But for instance, the guy that's on here or was on here, he is this is my sixth year working with him. Like there's a communication or a trust factor, or like a relationship that has been built where you have the opportunity. But if you tell me right now that Ella, if I need to start doing that on a consistent basis, because they'll either improve my outcomes, improve their readiness, or you've noticed that when you don't do it, if you did like the people that you used to do prior to implementing this had either re-injury, an increase in injuries, or major setbacks compared to those that you do it with now, then that's interesting. I want to know more.
Yeah, I don't know that, like I said, I don't know that necessarily has changed drastically when I release people, but certainly it changes how I approach the conversations when we start going towards that spot.
I got you.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I think this has been certainly helpful to me. I hope it's helpful to others as well. Sorry, there's another one just popped in. So,
Sure.
Lee, do you want to field this one? Do you have different requirements between players who play more time versus a person who's just in rotation? So, a supplementary player versus starter.
That's tough, right? Because I technically want them to have the ability to play meaningful minutes. I treat everyone that way, right? And so if I only follow me on this. If I only train or program for an athlete that gets 15 minutes a night, for one, I don't even know how to do that, right? Like I have an all or nothing approach. But let's just say 15 minutes a night. If I only train him that way, his capacity is for 15 minutes a night. The person playing in front of him gets injured for the season. The next game, he has to produce for 32 minutes a night, 2 times a week, possibly 3 times a week, depending on the schedule. Did I do him a disservice by not creating a capacity for the position to, in regards to the meaningful minutes, because of the fact that now he's unprepared and is more at risk for getting injured because of going from doing too little for too long and then ramping up and doing something so quick right away. You know what I mean? I butchered
Yeah,
that. I butchered
I
that quote.
agree.
You know what I'm talking about. You go from doing too little. What is it? Too little. Doing. I forgot what it is.
No, I think you're right, and I think the question was probably I'm sure certainly not I'm sure not rhetorical, but in general, I don't think there's an athlete out there that trains like a bench player, and I think in general everyone is
Yeah,
playing as if they're next man up or next woman up, and
that's
so
right.
everyone's out there ready to go whenever. In fact, you can make an argument it's actually much harder to come off the bench in the middle of a game after it's been an hour since warmups and all of a sudden get out there. And that's why those guys are so heavily coveted. But no, I agree with that. I think in general, you have to prepare as if you're going to play every single minute of every single game. And then whatever happens, happens.
Right. I wouldn't want percenters that only play 15 minutes a night, 12 minutes a night, or just a rotational player to only be able to back squat just their body weight.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
I'm not just dropping it.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate everyone coming. Look for our next webinar as well. We got a variety of topics. I think this one is certainly a very unique topic that isn't discussed nearly as much. And we really want to thank Dr. Leon Knight for joining us. Look out for the next one. So thanks so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Knight. We'll
Thank you
talk to you
guys
soon.
for the opportunity. I appreciate it as always.